Alaska runs off the edge of the imagination. This is where the American frontier finally ran out of ground and the future took root. The coastline of the Arctic Ocean, as harsh and threatening as any land on this planet, unless you're very well adapted. A forbidding place of ice and blizzards, unendurable cold, and brief, brilliant summers. Only a few years ago it seemed as desolate and inaccessible as the moon. A soft, trackless white desert where a man can see nothing between himself and the North Pole. Now this fragile land that's lived so long in isolation is being opened up and about to become one of the richest places on Earth. And this is why. The largest oil field ever found in America, and its great silver pipeline running from wells beside the Arctic Ocean, sliding across Alaska for 800 miles down to the ice-free Pacific. There have been oil booms before at other times and other places, but none has aroused the bitter battle that broke out in Alaska in 1968 in defense of this last great wilderness. Alaska, almost as big as Europe, was bought from the Russians a century ago for 2 cents an acre, the best land deal since Manhattan. Today, only religion recalls the previous occupants. Now Alaska is America, only more so. The greatest distances, the loveliest landscapes and deepest lakes, the tallest mountains. At the very end of the line, a hard land you can never forget. Almost half its people live in Anchorage, Alaska's one true city, a condensed instant Houston which came to life in 1914 as a tent camp for navvies building that railway. It's still excused in the name of pioneering. Build now, civilize later. Yet, unrelated to its environment, it's not a frontier town. It came in with the wind and American spore. And the boom has brought traffic jams, urban blight, short tempers, and high prices. It's the hive of human Alaska. A couple of 100,000 people, but only shopkeepers play the frontier game. Following the oilmen, the more adventurous tourists have found Anchorage, and in the shadow of new high-rise hotels, you can buy genuine Eskimo parkas with sequins. The oil boom's also reflected in new banks, hotels, parliament buildings, all thrown up with defiant disregard for Alaska's earthquakes. A major fault line runs through Anchorage where, in 1964, 130 died in America's worst earthquake. In this brash new city, the cabins of the pioneers seem as out of place as Anne Hathaway's cottage. But civilization, if that's what we call it, has caught up. And the curious character of this misplaced frontier city shows itself in traffic wardens earning £20,000 a year. And instead of those Wild West marshals we know and love, cops who are members of the most powerful and militant trade union, the Teamsters. The white man brought his weaknesses here with him, and the Eskimo surrendered immediately, and in return gave us the word hooch.
Let me first.
No, I know this guy for years. What's this here? What's this here?
I don't. What are you pouring on there? Come on, Ed, damn it.
Oh, you weakling duckling.
The Russian Church of St. Nicholas at Eklutna, Anchorage, with a mainly native congregation, but an American priest, Father Harris, now blessing graves which retain their little houses for the spirits of the dead, but with Russian Orthodox crosses. Worshippers are savaged by the ferocious Alaskan mosquito, so big and hungry it's known as the state bird. After centuries of poverty, the 60,000 Alaskan natives, Indians, Eskimos and Aleuts, have been transformed into capitalists with the passing of the Native Claims Settlement Act.
всякое сокращение, содеянное им словом, и все Христе Боже наши Тебе славу воссылаем с обозначалым.
This legislation gave them 40 million acres and $1 billion, and perhaps absolved the American conscience for 300 years of broken treaties. Eklutna village has become the largest landowner in Anchorage, 100,000 acres valuable as any in the world. The creation of their wealth,
Christ is among us.
of Alaska's wealth, starts here at a Christmas tree upon an oil well at Prudhoe Bay in the Arctic. The first of 10,000 million barrels of crude oil have begun to pass this way, a mammoth engineering feat said to be the greatest construction job since the pyramids, defeating even the Arctic winter. Through the icy blizzards of the long Arctic night, 26,000 men, most of them teamsters, manhandled 800 miles of half-inch steel in cold so intense it changed its molecular structure, and flesh could freeze in seconds. Industry's most ambitious, dangerous project, and more than half of it owned by BP, Britain's biggest business. Indeed, all Alaskan sums these days seem to have 6 zeros, with wages in proportion. £600 a week's an average, 1,200's not unusual, and welders have carried home £20,000 after 9 weeks. The only thing to like, they say, is the money. For their survival in this savage land, BP spent £12 million shipping accommodation modules from Seattle by barge. Joined and placed on stilts driven 30 feet into the frozen soil, the permafrost, the enormous aerodynamic pleasure drome withstands icy blizzards, cares for 260 people, and floats like a space station on a sea of tundra. The Operations Center, or Arctic Hilton, is designed and decorated to relieve psychological stress caused by tedium. In the bleak world, where for 56 dark winter days the sun never rises, the transparent roof allows what light there is to reach the recreation area's artificial turf. On closed-circuit television, the most popular program is, of course, investment planning. There's a swimming pool, gymnasium, and the only trees for hundreds of miles. Another softening influence has been the arrival of women. Now equal rights has given lucky girls the chance of laboring.
I think it's real lucky for all. We're all pretty young to be making this much money.
And what are you going to do with the money when you made it?
Buy land and travel.
Yeah, I want some land in Alaska.
And then I'm gonna move to Mexico and live off my investments.
The big problem here is not keeping sane, as you might think, but keeping slim.
What's on the menu, Chef?
Oh, steak. Would you like a steak tonight, sir?
What else have you got?
We have some poached salmon.
Too much.
More than 4,000 calories a day are available to fight the cold of this frozen land where, even in summertime, it's not easy to get about. Oil was discovered in '68, the rights auctioned for £520 million, and the company's ready to drill, when conservationists concerned about caribou and spawning salmon delayed development for 5 years, and if it hadn't been for the Arab oil embargo, it might not be flowing today. Wildlife's now been safeguarded at enormous expense, and now they face vandalism and sabotage. Almost everyone in this hunting country has a high-powered rifle, and every highway sign shows the eager hunt for targets. The gleaming pipeline invites such attention from armed idiots. Already one man's been arrested for 5 dynamitings. A pumping station explosion killed a worker, injured 5 and did several million pounds worth of damage, but the crude oil's running again. A potential high explosive and a vulnerable target. This silver line crosses 2 mountain ranges and 34 rivers. In 3 earthquake zones, it zigzags to take the strain. "382 miles of it run on stilts, keeping hot oil away from the permafrost before diving safely underground. It takes the sluggish oil 30 days to reach Valdez, the ice-free deep-water port where giant tankers will collect and deliver to the lower 48. Valdez was totally destroyed by the '64 earthquake, so they've rebuilt it 4 miles away. Each of those 18 hopefully quake-proof storage tanks covers an acre, stands 7 stories high, and holds more than 500,000 barrels of crude. It's a cold, wet, miserable workplace, but at the crossroads, there's a happy face.
He usually throws out joints to me.
Marijuana is legal in Alaska.
But the drivers are wonderful. They try to keep me entertained, and I try to keep them entertained.
Now, how do you do that? What sort of money do you earn for 11 hours here?
6 days a week, I get, well, it's 10.5 hours and a half hour for lunch.
Yes.
And I'm getting $533 take-home pay. They take about 48% out of my check.
What for?
Taxes and dues and all the other goodies. I hear it's almost as bad as England.
But none of the policemen in England earn about £400 a week. That's the difference, you know.
But then what's the price of rice?
Happy lollipop ladies and construction roughnecks are being replaced by computer experts as electronic wizardry commands the oil to flow. This board controls the pipeline.
That's exactly right.
That has a little hat on it, that button.
That's exactly right.
That's the doomsday button.
That's the one that dominoes the whole line.
Now you can see how the oil is flowing right from Prudhoe Bay. This is the whole 800 miles of it.
That's exactly right. Period.
Now, if you had a break, if you had, I don't know, say you had a terrorist who blew the line up, do alarm bells ring and lights flash?
We get an audible alarms.
Yes.
And we get backlighted information and flashing indications on our console.
But what about, I don't know, say if terrorists came in here? This is a very important room, isn't it? Couldn't they just walk in with a machine gun?
No, they sure couldn't. We have a card access.
Well, there's just one man outside. They break that window and come straight through.
Well, I guess if they really had that in mind to do it, and we weren't geared to stop them, they could come on in. I don't know that you could say we're definitely invulnerable in that sense of the word.
You haven't got a submachine gun under your desk yet?
No, I don't think that's part of our equipment.
So after years of political and legal battles, the largest oil field on the continent begins to slake America's tremendous thirst through this terminal. The end of an expense-no-object project which has reinforced the invincible position of Alaska's Teamsters. This all-powerful union was investigated by 2 young reporters on the Anchorage Daily News, and their courageous stories won them journalism's Pulitzer Prize. Now one of them started his own paper, Harold Weaver, born here in Anchorage.
I do wish that the development which is going on now were being done differently. I think this sort of go-for-broke mentality that's been evident on the pipeline, and well, the pipeline is certainly the visible sign of it, has seriously hurt Alaska. And I think it's made a lasting mark. I fear it's made a lasting mark on the state. For example, I think that the pipeline owner companies recently announced that there was a total theft from the pipeline of $850,000 worth of equipment and tools and so on. And it so happens that I've talked to a young man whom I believe who himself has stolen almost $100,000 worth of equipment, and I find it hard to believe that I have somehow tracked down the person who's responsible for 1/8 of all the theft. The pressure to get it done, to get it built, was so intense that how it was done and how efficiently and how expensively really became secondary considerations.
How is it, do you believe, that when Teamster power is diminishing elsewhere, here in Alaska it seems to be becoming greater and more absolute?
The leader of the Alaska Teamsters, Jess Carr, is a dynamic and obviously a successful kind of man. He's brought a lot of the force of his personality to play on it. And the Teamsters here have been very successful in integrating themselves at really various levels. I mean, butchers are Teamsters in Alaska, bakers are Teamsters, telephone operators.
They and 25,000 others, some paying £25 a week in union dues, are controlled by Jesse Carr.
If the good chaplain wasn't here, I'd tell a dirty joke. We all understand that.
With more than £60 million in their pension fund, Teamsters can haggle with oil companies on almost equal terms. Carr's demands have done more than geographic isolation to push up Alaskan prices, now amongst the highest in the world.
Continue to get the best.
In America, the Teamsters have long been plagued by a hoodlum reputation. Jimmy Hoffa, the former leader, was jailed and on release killed by hitmen. And now 2 of their officials have been murdered.
We're working on a contract that's hard to believe. Run the North Slope, an 18-hour guarantee. We got a lot of contracts, they're good through and through. Teamsters of Alaska are working for you. Oh, we are the Teamsters 959, bound and determined from the whole line. We're part of the International Brotherhood too. Teamsters of Alaska are working for you. Oh, we are the Teamsters 959. Proud that we're one of a kind. We stand 23,000 in the things that we do. Teamsters of Alaska are working for you.
If the union can provide these wide-ranging benefits, which we called womb-to-tomb benefits, you know, sort of starting with prenatal care of the mother and ending with death benefits, that's their own business, except that Governor Jay Hammond has a lot of authority over my life, but at least I participate in the process of electing him. Jess Carr probably has almost equal influence on my life, and yet I and the average citizen have nothing to say about his ascendancy or the powers that he's given or so on. I think it's troubling.
Now, you revealed that there were a number of convicted criminals running the Alaska depot up at Fairbanks.
That's right. Since we, by the way, had that article, 2 of those men have turned up dead. They disappeared last summer, were missing all winter, and are presumed, according to law enforcement sources to whom I've spoken, to have been killed in some kind of power struggle there.
Well, now, in your investigations, did anybody try to lean on you?
Never beyond the point of saying it's not a good idea to cross so-and-so, or you'd better be careful when. And the paper was subject, the Daily News, to some economic threats. I think, again, never directly from the union management, but they did say people who cross Jess Carr, you know, don't do well in this town.
2 of your members were murdered. 2 of your officials were murdered in Fairbanks. Has there been any development on that?
We don't know what happened. We're still actively investigating best we can. We've had private investigators on for a long time on the Teamsters payroll trying to figure it out. And they think they know what happened, but they're not sure that they can prove it. And so we're going to continue on until such time as we have a resolution of that problem, one way or the other. It's terrible. It's a terrible thing.
Now, you seem a thoughtful and avuncular man. How is it that the bosses are so frightened of you?
Well, I think that's newspaper talk. You know, I've been here almost 27 years. I've had very little strikes, contrary to what the newspapers say. And I don't know anyone that's scared of me. If you attend some of our bargaining sessions, you would it would change their mind because they're surely not scared of me.
You see, you have said, or people have said of you, that you could shut down Alaska.
Well, let me ask the obvious questions. I never have in 27 years, so why should they be worried about it now?
But you could.
I could.
There's a little question that at some level, and I'm not saying at Jess Carr's level or at the top management level, that physical intimidation comes to play.
Is you don't mind walking up an alleyway now?
No more than I did before, let's say. I don't feel singled out. But that's partly the prerogative of a journalist, don't you think? When you're very visible, the actual physical threats, this is what I always told my wife at least, the actual physical abuse is less likely to happen to me than to some unknown shopkeeper who's willing to stand up. He, I think, is in more danger than I am. I mean, I figured the best thing that could have happened to me was a flesh wound by someone proved to be a teamster.
Intimidators and intimidated go fishing. On 4 weekends a year, hundreds of sportsmen leave Anchorage and drive south to the Ninilchik River. When the salmon are running in this enormous empty land, campers congregate. There may be conservationists among them, but it doesn't look like it. Each mobile home brings weekend fishermen well aware of the price of salmon. The handful of local professional fishermen are not happy about this amateur invasion.
Yeah, we're convinced that we have to save our state from Alaskans, which is a pathetic and I think a horribly indicting thing. The dream that I have is that I think that in Alaska, the ultimate dream that I have is that this is perhaps the last chance that we in this country have to do it right. There's an awful lot of wilderness and a lot of area that provides for man, and man can live in the sense of community. And if that keeps up, this will be just like some of the other places where we're seeing in New York City and Los Angeles. Anchorage is fast turning into that with traffic, where the quality of our air, our water, our fisheries. There comes a time when man can, I think very seriously, we can become so civilized that technology and civilization will be the death of us. Anchorage is now the capital of in Alaska for oil companies and the oil headquarters. The prices are grossly inflated. The pipeline has left a permanent scar across the land of Alaska, and it's far more pervasive than just a little thin thread of silver pipe. It cuts into economic and cultural ways of living. Various communities that are of native cultures are dying.
Celebrating his 22nd birthday, an Eskimo fisherman fell into the sea and so within a couple of minutes froze to death. Now Ned Williams, a member of the National Guard, receives a military funeral. With their deep respect for nature, Eskimos greet death without fear. Their reactions casual. Old people past their usefulness were once left out on the ice to die just to make room. After burial, relatives will spend 3 days at home in lamentation. These are the new capitalists, title holders to vast lands rich in minerals and oil, plus $1 billion handed to their native corporations to invest for them, and soon to filter through even to 200 grieving Eskimos on lonely Nunivak Island, way out in the Bering Sea. As the young fisherman lies in his coffin, relatives pay their last respects and take a few last photographs.
We shall meet on that beautiful shore in the sweet by and by. We shall meet on that beautiful shore.
As you see him for the last and final time, remember, it could have been you. Are you ready to meet your maker? I came all the way from Anchorage.
The Reverend Nathan Toots, an uncle from Anchorage, officiates.
He had the graveside service of my nephew. I had no idea that I would one day...
Apart from those pictures and a few goodbye kisses, Ned's buried according to Christian practice. Household goods the dead man might need in the spirit world are no longer left on the grave, since it's seen his relatives have more use for them. They're still waiting for those millions of dollars.
The body of David Williams into your everlasting hands. Lord, we commit everything into your bountiful hands. For Paul says,
Driving down to Whittier is one of those odd Alaskan experiences. There's no doubt about it, you do things rather differently up here. Only 62 miles from Anchorage, including 3 miles of tunnel, but we might as well be going to Tibet. In Alaska's exuberant days of oil boom, Whittier's bust. The forgotten harbor town's a mournful example of Alaska's gold rush history of feast or famine. You have to make quite an effort to reach poor, isolated Whittier.
Well, that's the only way you can ride into this frigid frontier town. There's no road in. You could, I suppose, climb across those moist mountains, or you could trudge over the ice-blue glacier in the corner there. You could sail in, if you don't mind spending 7 hours in a little boat, or you could even fly in. That's if you're prepared to land on an 800-foot strip. But all in all, it's quicker by rail, and rather safer too.
Whittier's a monument to some mad army planner, and when top brass make mistakes, they make big ones. One of the largest buildings in Alaska, an almost deserted Arctic skyscraper that could have been airlifted from Chicago. The US Army spent £30 million to build this deep-water port at the start of the war with Japan. 2 buildings to house 32,000 men, but none of them arrived. It was abandoned, reactivated, deserted again. The state considered turning the whole town into a maximum security prison. Then they thought of making it one great asylum, but decided the place might be too depressing for the mentally disturbed. The last idea was a gambling center, a sort of deep-freeze Las Vegas.
But Whittier seems fated to be just the home of dreams that never come true. A sad grey-green hideaway in this Arctic wilderness, a home of losers, bewildered and bankrupt. While just up this wild coastline in neighboring Valdez and Anchorage, Alaskans are getting ready to be very rich indeed. Yet it seems that everyone who comes to this army surplus city at the end of the line just can't wait to escape.
I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome you aboard the motor vessel E.L. Bartlett.
Sailing thankfully away from Whittier, you come face to face with the Columbia Glacier. It doesn't look it, but that wall of ice is tall as a 40-story skyscraper, more than 2 miles across, and so compressed that only the short blue rays of the spectrum penetrate. There's a theory that sound waves will activate the glacier, cause it to calve, to shed its ice, and sometimes it does. The Ice Age in which Alaska's glaciers were created came with terrible speed, freezing animals before they could escape, preserving their flesh so well men have eaten mammoth steaks 15,000 years old, fresh from nature's deep freeze. When glaciers move, they rearrange the scenery. They cover 20,000 square miles of this last frontier, where to travel its immense distances the people of Alaska take to the skies. This is the flyingest place in the world, and every well-furnished home has a plane parked outside the front door. They've used aircraft lots, and they don't always bother to file a flight plan to pop down to the corner shop. Sometimes, of course, if you're not used to this airy way of life, it can become downright ridiculous. Poor chap ran out of fuel and not a garage for miles. Still, he'll be all right, not worth stopping for. Perhaps because of this casual use of aerial jalopies, there's a map at Air Rescue Headquarters bristling with more than 1,000 pins, each showing a crashed plane not recovered. For with its whiteouts, icy fogs and unknown mountains, Alaska offers the world's most hazardous flying, despite such deceptive peace and beauty. Mount McKinley, 20,300 feet, America's tallest mountain. Indians call it the home of the sun. A sky full of rock, rising abruptly 3.5 vertical miles. A daring pilot, risking sudden turbulence, can edge his apprehensive passenger close enough to wave at a mountaineer or start an avalanche. In a ski plane, I flew almost halfway up this marvelous mountain to land on a hidden glacier. I flew with a man who's climbed Mount McKinley the hard way 21 times. Ray Genet, a mountain guide, and the Red Baron of McKinley. He tried to explain the fatal lure of these great white wastes.
3 Japanese got killed on the upper part at 16.5. They fell.
3 Japanese?
And then 3 got killed in an avalanche also last year.
That's 6.
And there was a lot of action up here. Yeah.
So how many people got killed last year?
9 or 10.
Can you give me, in your words, the appeal of this? I mean, I can see how beautiful it is. I mean, it's a heart stopper, isn't it? It's so breathtaking.
Well, this is really exciting, and of course, reaching the summit is a hell of an experience for a lot of people, you know, and they learn a lot about themselves and about other people, and very often it's not always a good experience. Some people completely break down.
Exactly,
there,
you learn bad things about people.
Oh yeah, you have, I've seen multi-million-dollar corporation executives sit down and cry like babies.
So which is the biggest threat, do you think, to your way of life? The environmentalists, the conservation lobby, or the developers?
Everybody, really. The oil companies actually are the biggest
threat.
I would like to see no oil come out of the pipeline. It'd be sort of funny, because it's like a kid who's gone wild. A 20-year-old kid, he gets married, he buys a lot of furniture on time, TV and stereo and all that. They're on a real spending binge. But I am against so-called progress and development. You know, I like the romantic past. This is still a man's land, you know, where you can make a place for yourself. And the fact that you don't have many people living in Alaska, your voice can be heard.
If landing on a glacier is a shaking experience, taking off can be even more emotional. You already feel like a new pin on that air rescue map, about to fly into the mountainside and disappear forever. Getting around Alaska in the 70s. Once the only way to travel was by dog sled, the romantic way to go. In summer, when there's no snow, the mushers who are keeping the art of dog sledding alive follow their teams in a way that would have surprised Eskimo Nell. Without reins, the lead dog guided by voice, interpreting for the others. The Iron Dog, the snowmobile which doesn't eat, almost caused the extinction of the dog team, but because of sled racing, the official sport of Alaska, the Huskies not only survive, but is making a comeback. Alaskans see their land as a gateway to self-renewal and independence, where a man can pit himself against nature and kill his own meat. He can live alone in the wilderness where rumbling earthquakes testify creation's still in progress and the game's afoot. To populate the wilderness in the days when land seemed inexhaustible, the government gave sites to a homesteader prepared to live and work on his patch. So Alaska, this mixture of yesterday and tomorrow, carries into the 20th century a frontier life that's vanished elsewhere. One of the last to claim his 5 free acres was a Texan, granted this home site in 1964. Chester Johnson built himself a log cabin in 3 months, rolling timber down the mountainside, and makes good use of his stream. He's lived alone for 13 years, and now there's nothing he can't do or shoot.
How long ago did you catch her, Chester?
Oh, it's about 3 weeks ago, I guess, right across the river here. And only at this time of year in the spring, like when they're, the fur is in still prime condition, see.
Right.
This is good meat yet, though.
Is it?
You bet.
What settled you on this position here? I mean, it's the most beautiful place I've ever seen, I think, but why here? Why not up the road a piece? Or...
well, the scenery and the timber, and I knew there's all kinds of wild game here for hunting and trapping in the winter and this, and a nice little waterfall here for ample water supply year-round, and I just like it.
Now, are there any disadvantages to this sort of life?
Well, I've lived here 9 years, and if there are, I haven't found them yet. I enjoy every day of it.
There aren't many men who can say that, you know.
Such satisfactions are not apparent in Anchorage, except to the most avid Alaskan. The owner of the Daily Times arrived from Massachusetts in 1935 and has become one of the richest men in the state. Robert Atwood and his paper supported the building of the pipeline.
Yes, and I'm accused of being a rank, extreme exploiter and developer. And yet I love the wilderness. I go out into the wilderness whenever I get a chance, and I enjoy it. And I claim I am as much of an environmentalist as most other people, except that I don't go so far in banning people. I think people have a place in this world.
You see, it's normally said that people come to Alaska to praise nature and make money exploiting it.
Well, yes, they used to come here to make a quick buck and get out. And that's one of the things we had to break. We had to make people think of this place as home.
Now, what do you think, then, that your present state government wishes to do with the state?
Well, the governor is a great environmentalist, and there are those who suspect he would like to put it to sleep.
Democratic Governor Jay Hammond, once a fisherman and bush guide, is a wilderness man. In this Republican stronghold, he fears the oil men may one day take their profits and leave, for little of the wealth that Alaska's created in the past has ever stayed here.
We've permitted that sort of what I call rip-off and run syndrome to occur in Alaska. It's been the history of the state. And my determination is to assure that what development we have and what people who flood up here are truly paying their way. We could become very rich if we do things properly and carefully. We've lived in what I call a politician's paradise. We've been able to expand all sorts of government programs and not go to the public and extract more tax dollars, which is the normal process. Because of that, we've become dangerously dependent upon revenues that we'll only see once.
Ever since Captain Cook, Alaska's always been discovered, but never remembered. Fur traders, whalers, gold miners all made their pile in the midnight sun and carried it away. And now history could repeat itself as huge salaries are drained off to Texas and Oklahoma, profits to Houston and London, and at the end of the day, Alaska could be left with broken roads, empty schools, and violated wilderness.
The oil will be gone. If there are no discoveries beyond Prudhoe Bay, it'll be gone certainly in my lifetime, in the next 30, 40 years. And I'd like to leave some legacy of that for future generations, where you're not saying, you know, we developed the oil in our lifetime, therefore we'll spend it in our lifetime, but where there are commitments made to build a stable economy, one that doesn't require maybe continual growth. And that's what I think has happened here. It's become superheated, which is probably better than standing in an unemployment line in Detroit. I don't know. I'm not saying it's terrible, but there is a sense here, I think, of promise denied.
North of the Arctic Circle, on the very rim of North America, the promise of Point Barrow has not been denied. It was always awful, now it's worse. There's nothing between Barrow and the North Pole except 1,300 miles of shifting, groaning ice pack and the rare, shifting, groaning visitor. Barrow's probably the coldest, ugliest place in the world, for the Arctic's like a giant refrigerator and the decomposition of matter's extremely slow. Debris survives forever, so this Arctic eyesore's a permanent junk heap without sewerage, but with smells. Prudhoe Bay is only 150 miles away, so the oil money's arrived, though not by taxi. They don't get around much anymore. The new Eskimo millions, also filtering through, show themselves in a supermarket which would be more at home in an American suburb. Though it is taking advantage of all this daylight by extending its opening hours from midday till 2 a.m. This Eskimo village became a whaling station in the 18th century, and the hunting season still shapes the year. In May, the whales swim north, and now in September they pass Barrow again, heading back to the Pacific. When local crews kill, they play host to visitors and village. As in centuries past, the Eskimos gather impassively for their whaling festival. And since each whale produces 50 to 100 tons of food, there's enough for everyone. Their greatest delicacy produces a rare smile. It's called muktuk. Thank you. It looks like wedding cake, but it's the thick rubbery skin of the whale with a layer of blubber attached. It's a sort of Eskimo caviar, but when you get to grips with it, muktuk turns out to be downright indestructible. It's very tough.
Wait a minute, wait a minute.
I thought it was my teeth.
Oh, that's flipper. You know, you gotta cut that.
Thank you very much. Here. Here. Now, can I leave that with you? That's enough for me. Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
From a helicopter, we're hunting a polar bear for its own good. The white giants of the Arctic are in danger. There's believed to be only 20,000 alive, half of them here off Alaska, but they're falling towards their critical survival level of 12,000. Because the habitat of these splendid endangered animals is so hostile to man, little is known about them. Now that bear on the right's about to be shot in a most concerned way. The anesthetic dart doesn't put her to sleep, merely paralyzes her, so she'll be willing to take part in the Polar Bear Project and be carried back to the base of the US Fish and Wildlife Service in the Barrow Naval Reserve. There the anesthetic wears off and one can see the need for those very thick bars. Here she comes, looking quite cuddly. Our bear's about to be shot once again to bring out her better nature. Jack Lentfer, a kindly man, is trying to learn more of the habits of these unsociable animals by fitting a collar radio which, when she's free again, will transmit her movements to Nimbus 6, a satellite 200 miles overhead, and from space back to a laboratory where scientists will track her during and after hibernation. The equipment is painstakingly made to measure. Our bear, 7 or 8 years old and weighing 400 weight, is getting a Savile Row fit, though she'll surely try to undress.
What she'll probably do is lay on her side and try to, they pick at it like this. And it seems to take them several hours to adapt, and after they have adapted, they seem to accept it.
Now, what about the Russians? If she's roaming around, is it possible that Russians are going to shoot her?
Probably not. The Russians don't normally kill bears. And we have an international polar bear group that meets every 2 years. We correspond back and forth in between these meetings, so they're fully aware of what's happening here.
But she's got this thing on her for the rest of her life.
No, we hope to come back in a year's time, immobilize her again, and remove the whole unit.
Why the sudden urgency to do this? I mean, there's a lot happening up here on the North Slope, but...
We're particularly concerned about all the expanded human development along the Arctic coast, the effects that this disturbance might have on the bears. If they start drilling oil, there's always a chance of spills, oil spilling. Of course, this can directly affect bears by matting the fur, by covering the eyes, getting in the nose and nostrils, and it indirectly affects them by affecting the entire food chain that supports the bears.
So, wired for sound and still not complaining, though her privacy's gone forever, she's carried back to the cage, there to be mated before being returned to the ice and released. She'll go into her snowed den late in October, her cubs will be born in January, and the family will emerge in April, closely observed by Nimbus 6. The tranquilizer begins to wear off, and the transmitter timing device is started, while another delicate scientific instrument called a broom distracts her attention. Then back into the helicopter and homeward bound. The tranquilizer so measured she'll be active and able to look after herself as soon as she's alone again. Though, of course, they don't want her too active too soon. Not with those teeth. In their hunt for bear and seal across the Earth's last great wilderness, Eskimos invented the blanket toss as a way to spot game, to scan the horizon of their flat white world. Today it's just a sport, a festival game in the midnight light that falls in well with the slow-moving rhythm of Arctic life. These people are in transition. caught without a culture between their old ways and the beguiling and less burdensome life they now see around them, in their strange, haunted land on the brink of the world.